Growing up as a kid, yeah. All a nigga wanna have was a Burberry scarf and $3 in my pocket. Instead I got beat with a switch, but I don't give a fuck, but it's on my body. Scars all up on me, but I run around from.
So how good would the Pittsburgh Steelers defense be this upcoming NFL season in 2020? Now, the Steelers' defense in 2019 was the best defense in all of football, right? Now, a lot of people can say the New England Patriots had the best defense in football, but when you look at what the Pittsburgh Steelers defense did, they basically carried the offense. And you know it's all saying that goes, the best offense is a great defense. And the 2019 Pittsburgh Steelers defense was a great example of that, right? Like, that defense had a lot of pressure to perform. A lot of pressure, because basically, if the Pittsburgh Steelers defense didn't get a turnover or a big stop, the offense was going to have a hard time moving the football down the field. And on 80% of the Pittsburgh Steelers scores, like field goals and touchdowns, most of those were set up by the defense creating a turnover, putting the offense in great field position, right? So that defense really stepped up last year. And before I even dive into anything further, we got to talk about defensive coordinator Keith Butler. Keith Butler had a lot of pressure on him going into the 2019 NFL season. Like, a lot of people, a lot of Steelers blogs, a lot of Steelers websites were saying that 2019 was a big year for Keith Butler, because a lot of people were calling for Keith Butler's job, and Keith Butler really stepped up in a major way. Like, Keith Butler's defense last year was absolutely lights out. So when you look at the Steelers defense, they pretty much don't have any big notable losses. This is basically the same exact defense from last year. Now, pretty much the biggest loss the Steelers pretty much had on the defense was probably losing defensive tackle Javon Hargrave to free agency. So that is a really big loss. But they bring in Chris Wormley, who they got in the trade with the Baltimore Ravens. Now, I'm a little bit skeptical if anybody that, you know, your divisional rival is able to willingly trade you. But hopefully the Steelers are pretty good when it comes to scouting talent, especially on the defense side of football. So I trust their judgment and trading for Chris Wormley. So when you look at the defensive line, the Pittsburgh Steelers have one of the best defensive lines in all of football. First of all, you got defensive end Cam Hayward, who is one of the best defensive ends in the NFL. He was an All-Pro last year. He had 9 sacks. Then you got Stephon Tuitt, who had 3.5 sacks last year, only played in 6 games. Now, he was on pace of having the best year of his whole entire NFL career, right? So if he probably would have stayed healthy, this is a guy in Stephon Tuitt who probably would have had like 7, maybe 8 sacks, right? So if he stays healthy, he'll probably end up having a breakout year this year compared to what he did last season. This upcoming year, he'll probably even top that, right? So then you also got Isaiah Bush, you got the veteran Tyson Alualu, so you got some pretty good depth there. Then, like I already mentioned, you got Chris Wormley at that defensive tackle position. Then you got edge rusher TJ Watt. Now, TJ Watt got raw for Defensive Player of the Year last year. I don't care what anybody says. There's no way Stephon Gilmore should have won Defensive Player of the Year over TJ Watt. I think they only give out these awards to players whose teams make it to the playoffs. But listen, I don't care if Pittsburgh didn't make it to the playoffs last year. TJ Watt was the best defensive player in the NFL last year. There's no way Stephon Gilmore should have won Defensive Player of the Year over TJ Watt. TJ Watt was not only an All-Pro, he had 14.5 sacks. He had 8 forced fumbles. He had 8 pass deflections. He had 2 interceptions. I mean, TJ Watt was the heart and soul of that Pittsburgh Steelers defense last year. So the fact that he didn't win Defensive Player of the Year last year is absolutely outrageous, and it's blasphemous in the great words of Stephen A. Smith. It is absolutely blasphemous that TJ Watt did not get Defensive Player of the Year. Instead, they gave it to Stephon Gilmore. And I can understand if they want to give it to players whose teams made it to the playoffs and things like that. But TJ Watt should have been the only exception to that criteria, right? Because TJ Watt was the best defensive player in the NFL last year, and he should have won it over Stephon Gilmore. Now, after that little rant, you also got Bud Dupree. Now, Bud Dupree had a breakout year last year. He had 11.5 sacks. He ended up getting the franchise tag, so it remains to be seen if the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to sign to a long-term deal. Now, I want to see if Bud Dupree is able to keep up that level of consistency. I think Bud Dupree may end up being a guy who may be able to repeat his double-digit sack season this year, but most likely I think he'll probably be a 9 sack guy, right? So you got Bud Dupree coming in. So you got TJ Watt, you got Bud Dupree. That tops off a really good front seven, right? Then you got linebackers, Devin Bush. You got Vince Williams. Devin Bush was one of the best rookies in the NFL last year. So he probably should have, I personally think he should have been, one of the top 2 finishers for Defensive Rookie of the Year last year. But hey, I'm not the guy who gives out the awards. I'm just saying, Devin Bush had a really outstanding rookie season. And you can tell that Devin Bush had a really big impact on the Pittsburgh Steelers defense, because when you look at what the Steelers defense was missing, I mean, ever since Ryan Shazier had that injury that he suffered a few years back, the Steelers linebacking position, when it comes to their ability to stop tight ends and things like that, has been a joke prior to Devin Bush getting there. Like, they were unable to stop routes coming across the middle. They struggled stopping tight ends. So once they brought in Devin Bush, didn't really see a lot of what you saw in the past couple of years out of Pittsburgh. So it's like they weren't getting carved up by tight ends and things like that, compared to what they used to do back in the few years prior to 2019, right? So then you also got Vince Williams, who is pretty solid as well. Then the cornerback position. Now the secondary was the biggest improvement compared to what the Steelers secondary has been the past couple of seasons. Like, that secondary play last season was the best secondary we've seen out of Pittsburgh Steelers defense in a very, very long time. I mean, that secondary was absolutely lights out. Joe Hayden was a Pro Bowler. Joe Hayden probably had one of the biggest comeback stories in the NFL last year. Like, everybody talks about Ryan Tannehill and his redemption story and things like that, but you also got to talk about Joe Hayden's redemption story. You got to think, this is the guy that the Cleveland Browns a few years ago casted out to the side and said, hey man, you're past your prime, you're washed up, you don't have what it takes to be a contributing starter in the NFL anymore. So they basically threw him to the side. They got rid of him. Pittsburgh brings it back in. He has a pretty solid 2018. 2019, he becomes a top 15 cornerback in the NFL, once again proving why he's one of the better cornerbacks in the NFL. And not only does he have a bounce back year, but he also makes it to the Pro Bowl. So that is a big middle finger to the Cleveland Browns on behalf of Joe Hayden, because Joe Hayden revived his career last year. Then you also got to talk about Steven Nelson. Now last year, I said that Steven Nelson was an underrated free agent signing. He was one of the biggest underrated free agent signings in the NFL. And a lot of Pittsburgh Steelers fans, like, they disagree with me. Like, they just brushed off. They said Steven Nelson isn't all that great, JT. You overrated him. He played for the Kansas City Chiefs. This guy was the best cornerback on the Kansas City Chiefs in 2018, right? So I knew if he would have become a Pittsburgh Steeler with a better secondary, with a better supporting cast, this guy would end up becoming a top 15 cornerback himself. And I was right about that, right? So Steven Nelson ended up proving me right. I said that bringing Steven Nelson in was an underrated free agent signing. He lived up to that, because he also was a top 15 cornerback last year. He also allowed less touchdowns and less yards than Stephon Gilmore last year, who ended up being Defensive Player of the Year last year. So I mean, Steven Nelson had a better year than Stephon Gilmore had based on stats, right? The only difference is that Stephon Gilmore caught more interceptions, and Steven Nelson didn't really catch a lot of the interceptions that he got his fingertips on. He got a lot of pass deflections, but he wasn't able to haul those things in, right? So then you got to look at Mike Hilton, who is one of the best slot cornerbacks in the NFL, if not one of the best slot cornerback in the NFL. You got Cameron Sutton there as well. He's pretty good as well. Then at the safety position, you bring in Minka Fitzpatrick. Minka Fitzpatrick, ever since the Steelers brought him in and they traded that first-round pick to the Miami Dolphins for him, he basically was the biggest reason for the Pittsburgh Steelers turnaround, because ever since Minka Fitzpatrick got on the Pittsburgh Steelers roster, he changed that defense. He made that defense go from a pretty good defense to one of the best defenses in the NFL. And when you look at when the Pittsburgh Steelers have had elite defenses, historically it has been when they had a good lockdown safety across the middle. And that's what Minka Fitzpatrick was last season. And when you look at what Minka Fitzpatrick did last year, I mean, he was one of the best safeties in the NFL. And it shows because he ended up being a first-team All-Pro last year, right? Then you also got Terrell Edmunds. Now, I've been really critical of Terrell Edmunds, right? But when I go back and I think about it, Terrell Edmunds, for the most part, was pretty solid last year. Now, this year, I'm expecting Terrell Edmunds to take that step and become one of the best safeties in the NFL in 2020. That is my expectation for Terrell Edmunds, because last year he was pretty solid. I mean, he had a better year compared to what he had year prior. So, I mean, Terrell Edmunds, I'm going to give him a little bit of a break, because I'm really critical of Terrell Edmunds, but Terrell Edmunds had a pretty good season last year, a really productive season, right? And I just want to take a moment to thank God that Mike Mitchell is not on the roster, because Mike Mitchell was absolutely garbage when he played for the Pittsburgh Steelers, right? So, I mean, I'm just glad that Mike Mitchell isn't, you know, one of the Steelers starting safeties, because I'm so glad that he's not on the Pittsburgh Steelers roster. I mean, it's just a fresh relief, because that dude was absolutely terrible in coverage, right? Then you got Marcus Allen. Now, Marcus Allen is really interesting, right? Marcus Allen is a guy who I want to see get a little bit more playing time. I think the Steelers should use him a little bit more on nickel packages and things like that, because I think Marcus Allen has potential to be a really okay safety in the NFL. I'm just trying to figure out why he hasn't got a lot more playing time than what he has did, right? Then you got Antoine Brooks Jr. out of the University of Maryland, who is a rookie. So I'm interested in seeing what his role is going to be. I think he'll probably be a guy who comes on nickel and dime packages and things like that. He'll probably be like a nickel or dime linebacker or something like that. So overall, this is a Pittsburgh Steelers defense that pretty much should pick up from where it left off last season. And like I said, last year they had a really historical season. I mean, when you look at how bad the offense was and what that defense was able to do, that defense basically was the Pittsburgh Steelers offense. Because if it wasn't for how good that defense played, the Pittsburgh Steelers probably would have had... They probably wouldn't have won 8 games last year, right? So kudos to that Pittsburgh Steelers defense. I think that Steelers defense is going to pick up from where they left off last year. So let me know how you guys feel about the Steelers defense this year. Make sure you guys like the video, subscribe to the channel for more NFL videos and content. And thanks for watching.